Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is from the incredible mind of MetalDragonSeeker over on Reddit No Sleep. And as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Lost Journal, Appalachian Giants. Let's get straight into that. The following journal entries were found in the New York State Archives in Albany, New York. They are the last 6 entries from Charles Williams, an agent for the Crown, delivering a message from the Governor of New York to the Governor of Maryland. He traveled with a Mohawk Indian guide, whom he referred to only as an Indian guide, never giving his name, and an Irishman named Mr. Fletcher serving as the interpreter. They took a rugged trail through the Appalachian Mountains. The reasons for taking such an unorthodox route were never explained. The first several entries were of little consequence. The message they were to deliver was never revealed in Williams' journal. All that was said was that it was of extreme importance, and for the governor's eyes only. 4 days into their journey is when the accounts become interesting. 3rd of July, 1712. Dear Loretta, our journey has been a hard one since we left the safety of the walls of Shinagati. This land is forested beyond anything I could possibly expect. The views are spectacular though. The rugged green carpeted hills seem to be endlessly unfolding over the horizon. In the morning they are tinted blue by the cloudless skies, and you can hardly tell where the skies end and the land begins. Mr. Fletcher and our Indian guide have been speaking more frequently as of late. I am beginning to feel there are things that they are not telling me about the trail ahead. They are becoming suspicious, constantly scanning the surrounding hills as if they are being watched. I assumed they were merely looking out for bears, but something has changed. Maybe it's just my inquisitive mind filling in the foreign Indian tongue. All my love, Charles. 5th of July, 1712. Dear Loretta, I can scarcely write after what we witnessed today. As we left a clearing, we came across 2 lonesome trees with thick branches peering out in all directions. To our horror, we found 2 lifeless corpses hanging from the trees, their faces contorted and rotted with black crows picking away at the flesh. It was terrible, Loretta. And judging from their white coats, they were French, and what they were doing in this part of the country, I cannot say, but someone did not take kindly to their presence. Our Indian guide became belligerent when he saw them, insisting that we turn back. And Fletcher says he spoke on and on about the giants who roam in these parts and how this was a warning that we were entering their territory. Now Fletcher was just as shaken as our guide, rambling on in his Irish tongue about giants and other jabberwocks of the old country. The Irish are just as superstitious as the natives of this country. I can hardly blame them, having seen such a grisly sight, but there is a perfectly logical explanation. I have no doubt that this was the work of the Indians in these parts, maybe even the Mohawks or other tribes unfriendly to the French. They would probably be willing to help us if they share our enemies. Still, I can't help but feel sorrow for these men. Fellow Christians should at least have a decent burial, and have time not been of the essence, I would have insisted we provided one. Your loving husband, Charles. 8th of July. My Loretta, the last few days have been nothing but non-stop talk of ghosts, monsters, and jabberwockies. Mr. Fletcher would fit in easily with the natives of this country, and he relayed a story from our guide of how the old gods were stricken down and forced to live on the earth. This apparently is where these giants have come from. I laughed when I first heard the story and questioned the Irishman about his merits as a Christian. And the story goes that the giants howl lamenting their fates, They live in the mountains to be closer to the heavens where they had formerly lived and to stay away from the humans whom they regard as inferior. Over the years they became dark and twisted, hating of all things and cursing the new gods and the humans who worship them. Well, how much of this story is actually from the guide and not a mixture of Irish folk tales and Fletcher's imagination, I cannot say. Charles. 11th of July. Loretta. For the second night we heard the howls, screaming deep bellowing across the mountain valleys. It's as if Fletcher's called down the giants from his story. Our guide has ceased to sleep without another lookout, and to appease him, I have agreed to have a night watch. I have to admit that my emotions are starting to rule my thoughts as I lay awake hearing the echoes across the dark valleys. I brought a looking glass for my pleasure, and when the moon is out I swear I can see rustling in the valley below. It's probably just bears or the wind picking up. Giants are not the main candidate. But I really should save my ink for more important updates. Charles. 12th July. Loretta, while I am not inclined to believe in giants, I am convinced that there is something dangerous in these mountains. Today, we came across another gruesome sight. It took time for me to realize what we were looking at. But in a grove, we found several trees painted in fresh blood. We found more and more trees about the grove covered with blood, until at last we came upon the source. 3 black bears, badly mutilated. They were disemboweled, missing their eyes and teeth. Blood came from their noses, and they were placed in a perfect circle. I still suspect that this could be the work of some savages. However, there were no arrows. It is possible they could have been shot before being mutilated. However, we heard no gunshots, and the kills were clearly fresh. Charles. 15th July. Ink is getting low, so I must be brief. The howls and growls continue at night. We have our muskets ready. Our guide has convinced us that he knows no tribe that inhabits these parts. Fletcher has asked him if it was safer to turn back, and he told Fletcher that it did not matter, that once the giants see you, there is no escape. My task is urgent, and I have no choice but to continue onwards. If they knew the contents of my message, they would know that turning back is not an option. 16th July. Our Indian guide has vanished. I know not where. We spent all day looking for him. Fletcher claims he knows a way down the mountain, and I have no choice but to follow him, as I am unfamiliar with these parts. We'll find a more conventional route from there. 17th July. Early in the morning we found, not quite sure how to explain, what looks like an organ hanging from the limb of a tree. Now, I am not a doctor, so I don't know what organ. The howls continue. The ground shakes at night. The moon hasn't shown itself in days, so my spyglass is useless. We fired off a round of musket fire as a warning shot to whoever is out there. 19th July. Loretta, this is my last entry. The ink is nearly gone. We saw eyes in the distance last night, blood red coming towards us. They vanished when we fired, but the howling always continues. It's getting closer now, each night. You have my love, Charles. This is the last entry in the archives. I found records of a Charles Williams, confirming that he was an agent to the King George and working in America. There is no further evidence of what was in the message that he was delivering on his journey across the Appalachians. There is no record of a Mr. Fletcher or an Indian who worked with Charles Williams, and there is no other evidence in the archive regarding what could have caused the disappearance of Charles Williams. Stones to guide The way. Let's get straight into that. The recollection is bright, yet not whole, and it reveals itself to me in fragments. We ate the fish we caught and cooked, the clear spring water, and the sun setting on the horizon as me and my grandpa remained isolated from the world. It was the day that I noticed it, a mound of stones on the trail, stacks of stones where the largest one was at the bottom and were stacked higher, gradually becoming smaller towards the top. The stones piqued my curiosity, and so I asked the wisest person I knew. "Dada, what are those?" He glanced at me and smiled. "They are just a pile of stones, Hamza." His answer did not persuade me. They had a sense of precision that distinguishes them from the nature around them. His answer did not persuade me. They had a sense of precision that distinguishes them from the nature around them, and it felt as though the littlest movement may have overcome them. They were so thoroughly balanced, yet at any time could be broken with a simple push. Part of me wanted them to tumble down, to respect our world's laws, to show that they really were simply a stack of stones and their structure was unnatural. "Dada, why do people stack them?" His big hand rested on my shoulder, and he bent down in the middle of the path. "People get lost sometimes. Sometimes they lose their way, and the stones provide a point of recognition. There are paths you may discover walking, paths to which you have no knowledge of how or when you have chosen that path." As we walked, the stones piled higher and higher. Some were right next to the path, while others stood in the grass further away, and as I observed additional stacks further ahead of us, it seemed like they were magically appearing, and I feared that they might be alive. But I was with Dada, and that meant that I was safe. Why, it seemed like eons ago that I walked that path with Dada, all before the cancer took hold, before he dove into the bottle head first and couldn't get out, before I could see his legs trembling, his eyes glossy, and staring into the void of the wallpapered wall. I'd forgotten about all the stones. It seemed along the way I had stumbled along my own path, one full of bottles, guns and money changing hands with people whose names I never know. I was stuck in a cycle, and I had saved up enough to see me out of here. All I needed was a ticket promised by Bilal. When you saw Bilal, you were always scared, for his reputation precedes him by miles, and he proved to be a man of many techniques. He was a man whose hands were in all kinds of business, both illegal and legal. Some even say he has connections with the terrorists across the border and owns opium farms so large that it is said he could supply the country twice over. As I knocked, he opened up the door, and his first words decreed that I was incredibly late. Of course, he didn't hear my apologies, and soon I walked in with money folded and squeezed in my hand's palm. His notorious white, thin cigarettes were everywhere, one after the other, in numerous chrome ashtrays littering the room. No words were spoken as he shuffled the money, tallied it, and handed a piece of paper to me, my ticket out of here. As I turned to go out, relieved, there was a cough from behind me. Bilal's eagle eyes were glued directly at me as I turned around, and he moistened his lips, rubbed his hands against his shalwar kameez, and he moved a step forward, just a foot away from me. "This it?" I glanced at him. "Yeah, that's it. The total amount 150 PKR. Bilal took his time. He reached for a pack of cigarettes, drawing one out with practiced ease out of the pack. His eyes were moist and piercing under the light as he looked at me. 150,000? Bilal asked. "Yes, that was the amount we agreed upon." He eyed his cigarette, waited, lighted it, and I began to shake. I did count it, and it was the exact amount. "Hamza, you are missing 2,000 PKR. In my chest I could feel the fear taking root. My fingers struck a quiet and hectic rhythm. "I can explain." "Stop," he whispered as he lit another cigarette, and I bit my lip for a minute and stayed completely silent. In the direction of the door, he shook his head. "Leave us." And soon the guards in the room left, and in silence Bilal sat. After minutes went by, I saw Bilal stand up and walk over to a table in a corner of the room. He walked to a black box on the table and soon lifted the lid. "You wouldn't do something so silly next time," his voice booming from the corner of the room as he spoke. And before I realized it, I'd run outside into the street and into the woods as fast as I could, my body so foreign to the sudden movement, my legs crying out, and after I had run a sizable distance, I stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. I heard Bilal's truck behind me. The truck's sounds terrible along the road, and soon his headlights gleamed in the woods as I glanced down the path I was following. But as I looked further, I saw it was marked by stones. Out of desperation, I ran to a fallen tree and hid behind it, keeping my eyes above the wood, looking at the road. Bilal and his crew soon rolled up just meters in front of me. They hopped out and began to scan the woods, Bilal obviously furious while he joined them in searching. Well, they too saw the stone piles and paid no attention to them. But as I crouched quietly behind the fallen tree, I saw a movement behind the truck. Behind the truck, a somewhat humanoid character stood completely silent behind them. As I looked more at the figure, I saw that it had no face and was nearly as dark as the forest that surrounded it. Soon a sea of noise washed over me, a sea of whispering, and I was more terrified by the sight of it than I could describe. At that time, I realized that the world is worse than Bilal. There were things that lurked at the ends of that which we knew. After seeing Bilal and his crew walk further away from me, I stood up, running down the path and sprinting into the darkness. But I grew tired, and if Bilal caught up with me, well, I'd be done for. And so I evaded the rocks, yet they seemed to continually appear beside me. It seemed as if something was hunting me in the forest. It seemed like they were waiting for me, I guess. This was what frightened me, the idea that I was tentatively drawn to new locations by this unknown power. And though I had seen them many times before, they also seemed to be a mystery. It seemed as if my adrenaline-filled mind had brought memories I had long forgotten. They seemed so strange wherever they appeared. And they appeared in the streets that I walked. They frequently appeared in my dreams, and now in the middle of the woods. Whoever made it seemed like they were a step ahead of me, invisible and observant, completely unnoticed by me. Ever since Dada died, it seemed they appeared more often, and now I was only realizing it as I ran for my life. I remember back to the night after Dada died. I remember the mysterious black figure was balanced silently on the rock of my desk, and I simply thought of it as a dream. I would sometimes not realize that I was too late and then watch them, and I would feel so full of terror that I would nearly not be able to move. I lost myself increasingly all the while I ran and allowed my sorrow to plant its own seed in my bones, finding myself in empty dumpsters with hot tears on my cheeks and now running into the wilderness. I escaped from Bilal that night as I ran into the forest, and I finally decided to face my fears. And as I made it back to the city, as I walked, I noticed small stacks of pebbles follow me throughout the city. Out of curiosity, I proceeded down the path they designated, resisting every impulse in my body. While I was walking, embracing the end, hoping for the end, the shadow figures began to appear from the rocks. They began to encircle me, filling the space around me until all I saw was a long path in front of me, and I followed it, paying no attention to the masses of shadows that encircled me. That's when I remembered what Dada said. The stones are for those who had lost their way, and they are there to lead them. As I followed the dark path, out of curiosity, I turned around and saw for the first time how far I had gone. I squinted my eyes to see the beginning of the path, and all I saw was me staring back from the start. And so, from that day on, I followed them, those weird stacks of stones. I followed them all the way across the country, into the base of the mountains, and I followed them on through the valleys, rivers, and over vast distances to places I could never describe. I was completely not alone on my journey, but in the face of the hardship I continued to follow these bizarre beacons. And as time went by, the stones appeared less and less. And eventually, I would only see one a day, but in the diminishing numbers, I still feel that powerful draw on me. And the older I got, the less I looked, and the years progressed. I found love, had kids, and now years later, I am Dada. Taking my grandson Yusef on lengthy treks in the wilderness, much like my Dada did with me, Though it has been years since I'd seen the stacks, I know my journey is not finished. Much like Dada, I tell Yusuf that people occasionally lose their path, but someone somewhere will build us a stack of stones so we can find our way home, no matter how dark the path. Wow. Short, but what a heartwarming story there. And equally mysterious. A big thank you to the author, LaDeckard, over on Reddit, No Sleep. Really did enjoy this story, and I certainly look forward to more of your work in the future. And of course, I hope you enjoyed my rendition. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And if you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. As always, guys, I hope you had a wonderful week and an even better weekend with friends or family, enjoying good food and good drink. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.